I need to close a plausibility gap, the analysis flagged, add an institutional accountability beat, and keep this fully original new characters, new setting, new method, while hitting the same emotional architecture. Here's the story. First person, older male narrator, addressing the audience by relationship, dear friend, family. My daughter-in-law's plastic surgeon took me aside while she was still numb from the anesthesia and told me something I will never forget. He looked over both shoulders first, like a man checking for snipers. Then he leaned in close and said, "Don't let your son near her medication chart, not for one more night." Before I could ask him what in God's name he meant, I heard my son's footsteps coming down that hospital hallway, whistling, of all things, like a man without a single care in this world. And when he pushed open that recovery room door, I saw what he was carrying in his hand, and my old heart nearly quit right there in that plastic chair. My name is Walter Higgins. I am 66 years old, dear friend, a retired fire captain out of a small town in eastern Tennessee, and for 31 years I ran into burning buildings so that other families could keep theirs whole. I want you to sit with me a while and let me tell you what happened to mine. I want you to hear it the way I lived it, because I have a feeling that some of you listening tonight, wherever you are, whatever kitchen table or porch swing or hospital waiting room you're sitting in right now, have felt this same particular kind of cold that I am about to describe. Before I go any further, would you do this old fireman a kindness and tell me where you're tuning in from tonight? It settles something in my chest to picture you out there, and if you have ever had to stand guard over someone you love, against the very people who were supposed to love them too, I would be grateful if you'd hit that like button and stay a while, because this story gets worse before it gets better, and I need you here with me for it. It started, as far as I can trace it, on a Tuesday morning in March, in the kitchen of the house I built with my own two hands, back in 1987. My wife, Colleen, was 63 years old then, and she had been the sharpest woman I ever knew. She taught high school chemistry for 29 years. She did the crossword in pen. She remembered the birthday of every soul in our church directory without ever once consulting a calendar. That morning she was standing at the stove, and she turned to me with a look on her face like she'd forgotten which room of her own house she was standing in, and she asked me, in a small, frightened voice I had never once heard her use in 40 years of marriage, "Walter, whose kitchen is this?" I want to tell you, dear friend, that I did not panic that morning. I want to tell you I was calm and steady, the way I'd trained 100 young firefighters to be calm and steady when the smoke gets thick and the visibility drops to nothing. But the truth is, my hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped my coffee mug on the tile. I walked her gently to a chair. I asked her my name. She knew it. I asked her the year. She hesitated, and then guessed wrong by 11 years. Within the hour, we were in the car, headed to the emergency room in Knoxville, and within the month, we had a diagnosis that felt like a bomb going off inside our home. Early onset vascular dementia, the doctors said, accelerated, aggressive, and cruel in a way that dementia does not usually behave in a woman her age. Our son, Marcus, was 38 years old at the time, and I will tell you plainly, dear friend, that Marcus had always been the golden one. Colleen and I raised one child, and we poured everything we had into him. He went to law school on scholarship. He became a partner at a firm in Nashville that handled estates and trusts for some of the wealthiest families in 3 counties. He wore suits that cost more than my first truck. He drove up to the house in a car so clean and so quiet you could barely hear it come up the gravel drive. And when his mother got sick, Marcus was the first one to step forward. He was the one who said, "Dad, you shouldn't have to carry this alone. Let me help you manage things." At the time, I thanked God for him. I thought I was the luckiest father in Blount County to have raised a son who would drop everything for his mother. Marcus moved back into the guest house on our property that spring, the little cottage I'd built for Colleen's mother years before she passed. He said it was so he could be close, so he could help with Colleen's care, so he could take some of the burden off my shoulders. He started handling what he called the paperwork side of things. He said a man my age, dealing with a wife declining the way Colleen was declining, shouldn't also have to wrestle with insurance forms and medication schedules and doctor's appointments. He said, "Let me carry that weight, Dad. You just focus on being her husband." And dear friend, I let him. God forgive me. I let him. Because I was tired in a way I did not have words for. And because he was my son, And because 31 years of running into fires had never once prepared me for the particular exhaustion of watching the woman I loved forget my face by degrees, a little more each week. For the first year, things seemed, in a strange and terrible way, almost manageable. Colleen had good days and bad days. On the good days, she would call me by name and hold my hand on the porch swing and hum the hymns she used to sing in the church choir. On the bad days, she would not know me at all, and I would sit across from her at our own kitchen table like a stranger, asking a stranger to remember him. It was the cruelest thing I have ever endured, dear friend. And I want you to know that I do not say that lightly, coming from a man who has carried children's bodies out of house fires. But somewhere in that second year, I began to notice things that did not sit right in my gut. Small things, at first. Things I told myself I was imagining because grief makes a man doubt his own eyes. Colleen's bad days started coming more often than her good ones. That, the doctors told us, was expected, was the natural progression of her disease. But it was the pattern of the bad days that began to trouble me. I noticed that her worst spells, the days when she was most confused, most unsteady on her feet, most likely to stare through me like I was made of glass, always seemed to fall the day after Marcus had brought her what he called her evening tonic. He'd started this routine maybe 14 months in, a warm cup of chamomile tea with a special supplement blend, he said, her new neurologist. A doctor he had personally selected and driven her to see twice had recommended for her memory. He was very particular about it. He insisted on preparing it himself every single night at exactly 9 o'clock, and he did not like me hovering in the kitchen while he did it. I told myself I was a suspicious old fool. I told myself that grief and fear will make a man see monsters in his own son's kindness. I told myself this for months, dear friend, even as some small cold voice in the back of my skull kept insisting that something here was not right. The insurance letter is what finally cracked the door open. It came addressed to Colleen, but Marcus had, as he'd arranged months before, power of attorney over her mail and her finances, just to simplify things for you, Dad. But this particular letter arrived on a Saturday, when Marcus had driven into Nashville for the weekend, and it landed in our regular mailbox instead of the P.O. box he'd set up. It was from a long-term care insurance company. It referenced an application, filed 3 weeks prior, for a full psychiatric and cognitive competency evaluation of Colleen Higgins to be conducted by a doctor, Wexler, whose office was 2 hours away in a town we had never once visited. I called that insurance company Monday morning, dear friend, my hands shaking on the phone the exact same way they'd shaken over that coffee mug 2 years before. A very kind woman on the other end explained, once she confirmed my identity, that the evaluation had been requested in conjunction with a petition for full legal guardianship, filed by Marcus Higgins, seeking to be named sole guardian of the person and estate of Colleen Higgins, on the grounds that she was no longer competent to manage her own affairs. I sat down hard on the kitchen floor when she told me that. I want you to understand, dear friend, I was not opposed, in principle, to my son helping manage his mother's care. What stopped my heart cold was a single word buried in the third paragraph of that filing, which the woman read to me slowly, at my request, 3 separate times. Estate. Colleen's mother, my late mother-in-law, had left her, some years back, a mineral rights lease on 40 acres of land in West Texas that nobody in our family had thought much about in a decade. It had sat quiet and mostly worthless, until, as I would learn 2 days later from a lawyer friend I trusted, a natural gas company had begun aggressive new drilling in that exact county 8 months prior, and that quiet, forgotten lease was now valued, by conservative estimate, somewhere north of $2.3 million. I did not sleep that night, dear friend. I lay in bed beside my wife, listening to her breathe, watching the slow rise and fall of the woman I had loved since I was 19 years old, and I made a decision that felt like the hardest and most necessary decision of my entire life. I decided I was going to find out, with my own eyes, exactly what was in that tea. The next evening, I told Marcus I had a headache and was turning in early. I did not go to bed. I sat in the dark hallway closet outside our bedroom, the one with the louvered doors that let a man see a sliver of the kitchen if he positioned himself just right, and I waited, the way I used to wait outside a burning structure for the signal to go in. At 9 o'clock, exactly as he did every night, Marcus came into the kitchen, And through that narrow gap in the louvered doors, dear friend, I watched my only son take a small brown glass vial from his jacket pocket, unscrew the cap with the casual efficiency of a man who had done this 100 times before, and empty its contents into his mother's chamomile tea. He stirred it in slow, methodical circles. He tasted a spoonful himself first, I noticed, likely to check the dosage hadn't turned the tea bitter enough to alert her. Then he carried the cup to Colleen, sat beside her, and with a tenderness that made my stomach turn inside out, helped guide the cup to his own mother's lips and told her, in the gentlest voice, what a good girl she was for drinking it all. I did not sleep at all that night, dear friend. I lay awake beside my wife and I watched her breathing slow and grow shallow, watched her twitch and murmur in a sleep that did not look natural to me anymore, not after what I'd witnessed. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, I made a second decision. I was not going to confront my son on my suspicions alone. I was going to build a case a courtroom could not ignore. I want to tell you, dear friend, that the next 6 weeks were the longest of my entire life, longer than any night I ever spent inside a burning building, waiting for the roof to hold. I drove, alone, to that neurologist's office 2 towns over, the one Marcus had insisted on, and I requested Colleen's full chart under my own name as her legal spouse. What I found there made my hands shake so badly the receptionist asked if I needed to sit down. The prescriptions on file were not for any memory medication. They were for a combination of a first-generation antipsychotic and a sedative, at a dosage that, the pharmacist I consulted quietly told me, would be considered dangerously excessive for a woman of Colleen's age and weight, particularly for someone who had never been diagnosed with any psychiatric condition requiring such medication in her life. I took a sample of the tea one more night, this time collected in a mason jar. I hid inside my old fire department duffel bag, and I drove it myself to an independent toxicology lab in Knoxville, paying cash so there would be no paper trail my son's law firm might somehow intercept. And I called my late brother's daughter, my niece Grace, who had become an elder law attorney in Chattanooga, specifically because she had once told me, years back at a Christmas dinner, over pie, about a case she'd handled where a family member had done almost exactly what I now feared Marcus was doing to Colleen. Grace did not hesitate for 1 second when I called her, weeping, at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. She told me, dear friend, words I will carry with me the rest of my days. Uncle Walter, what you are describing is not just a family betrayal. It is a felony, and we are going to stop him. Grace moved fast. She filed an emergency motion contesting the guardianship petition. She got a court-appointed independent medical evaluator assigned to Colleen's case, a woman named Dr. Okafor, who reviewed the toxicology results, reviewed the original chart, and within 4 days filed her own report with the court stating, in language I will never forget, that Colleen Higgins showed clear signs of medication-induced cognitive impairment consistent with deliberate overmedication, not naturally occurring vascular dementia as previously diagnosed. Dr. Okafor, dear friend, did something else too, something the audience in stories like mine so often wishes somebody would do. She did not stop at writing a report for a private court file. She personally contacted Tennessee's Adult Protective Services Division and filed a formal elder abuse report that same afternoon because, as she told me directly on the phone, a doctor who suspects abuse and stays silent is failing the very oath that put the letters after her name. Within 48 hours, an APS caseworker named Rhonda Blevins was standing on my porch with a state trooper beside her, asking to see the guest house where Marcus had been staying. They found the brown glass vials in a shoebox at the back of his closet. They found bank statements showing Marcus had already, months earlier, taken out a substantial loan against the projected value of that mineral rights lease, a loan he could only fully collateralize once he held legal guardianship over his mother's estate. They found text messages between Marcus and a woman I had never met. A woman, it turned out, was not, as he'd told us, a paralegal helping with the guardianship paperwork, but his mistress of over a year, discussing what the two of them planned to do with the money once Colleen was settled somewhere she'd be comfortable and out of the way. I confronted my son on that porch, dear friend, with the state trooper standing 3 feet behind me, and I asked him the only question I had left in me. Why? Why his own mother? Why the woman who had sat up with him through chicken pox and college applications and a broken engagement in his 20s that had nearly destroyed him. Marcus did not cry. He did not deny it. He looked at me with an expression I had never once seen on my son's face in 38 years, cold and flat and calculating, and he said, "She wasn't going to remember any of it anyway, Dad. I was just speeding up the inevitable and making something useful come out of it." Those words, dear friend, are the closest thing to true evil I have encountered outside of a fire that took a family I could not save. Marcus was arrested that evening on charges of elder abuse, fraud, and attempted theft by deception, later amended, once the full financial trail was uncovered, to include charges related to the forged medical authorization he had used to select Dr. Wexler for that independent competency evaluation, a doctor it turned out he had actually paid, quietly, through a shell consulting arrangement. The road back for Colleen, dear friend, was not fast, and it was not easy, and I will not stand here and tell you it was some overnight miracle, because that would be a lie, and I have told you nothing but the truth this whole way through. It took nearly 5 months of careful medical supervision to safely clear the medication from her system. 5 months of watching my wife move in and out of clarity like weather passing over a mountain. 5 months of doctors telling me gently that the damage might, in the end, prove permanent. But dear friend, I want to tell you about the morning it changed. It was late August, and I had driven to the rehabilitation center before sunrise, the way I had every single morning for 5 months, carrying her coffee the exact way she liked it. 2 sugars, a splash of cream, stirred counterclockwise because she always said clockwise. Stirring spoiled the flavor. Some private joke of hers I never once understood, but always honored. I walked into her room and found her sitting up in the chair by the window, morning light pouring gold across the floor. And something in the set of her shoulders was different. Something in her posture had come back home. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and her eyes, dear friend, her eyes found mine and held them, sharp and clear and entirely, unmistakably hers, the same eyes that had looked at me across a church basement dance floor when I was 19 years old and had not yet built a single thing in this world. I set the coffee down on the little table beside her, my hands shaking the way they had shaken outside that plastic surgeon's that neurologist's office, all those months before, though this time for an entirely different reason. She reached out, slow and deliberate, wrapped both her hands around that paper cup, and took a long, careful sip. She closed her eyes for a moment, savoring it. Then she looked up at me, and a small, familiar, teasing smile spread across her face, the exact smile I had fallen in love with 4 decades earlier, and she said, "Walter, honey, you stirred this the wrong way again." I fell to my knees right there beside her chair, dear friend, and I wept in a way I had not allowed myself to weep even once through the entire ordeal. Not through the diagnosis, not through the discovery in that dark hallway closet, not through the trial. I wept because my wife was back, because somewhere underneath the fog and the poison and the betrayal, Colleen Higgins had never once stopped being herself, and she had fought her way back to me with a determination fiercer than any fire I ever walked into. Marcus is serving 11 years now in a state facility 2 hours from our home. I have not visited him, and I do not know, honestly, if I ever will. Grace tells me the mineral rights case has been fully resolved in Colleen's favor, every dollar restored and then some. Though I will tell you plainly, dear friend, that money was never the thing I was fighting for in that dark hallway closet. I was fighting for the woman drinking coffee across from me every morning now on our porch swing, humming those old hymns again, slowly, patiently, remembering her way back to herself one small day at a time. We sold the house eventually, the one I built with my own hands in 1987, because too many rooms in it held too many shadows of that terrible year. Colleen and I bought a smaller place near the lake instead, somewhere quiet, somewhere with no guest house, no hallway closets, no room for anyone to hide secrets in the dark. Some mornings I still catch myself checking the tea before I hand it to her, an old fear that I suspect will never fully leave me, not after what I saw with my own eyes in my own kitchen. But most mornings now, dear friend, I just sit across from her on that porch, and I watch the sun come up over the water, and I listen to her laugh at something foolish I said, and I think about how close I came to losing her twice, once to a disease and once to a son, and how the only thing that saved her, in the end, was one old man refusing to stop trusting what his own eyes were telling him. even when his heart very badly wanted to look away.